Today's guest lost her father to suicide. And then a few years later, she lost her son to the same thing. In this episode, she teaches us how grief and joy can exist in the same space, and how just because we don't understand God's plan for us doesn't mean He doesn't have our best interests at heart. Welcome to the Why We Believe show, where members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints share their inspiring stories of faith and conversion to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Nathan William. Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode of the Why We Believe show. Today, I'm joined by Lark Galley. Lark has a master's degree in economics. She was the #1 global sales rep for a Fortune 500 company, earning multiple six figures in commission. She's, by many yardsticks, an incredibly successful person in the business world. Yet, like every successful person out there, she's had her share of challenges and heartbreak. Her father passed away from suicide, and then her son passed away from suicide. And she has gone on to become an advocate for suicide prevention issues and especially supporting family members. Richard Paul Evans said about her, "What I love even more than this book itself is the fact that Lark found the strength to write it. In this, we find evidence of not only courage, but hope." Thank you so much for joining us today, Lark.
Thanks, Nathan. I appreciate being here and sharing my story.
Can you start off by sharing with us something that not everybody knows about you?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, my father was undiagnosed bipolar. And so every day was an adventure. And I went to a different school every year of my life. So you can imagine being the new kid every year. And pros and cons with that, but I got to learn how to make relationships very quickly with other people, but also not having the depth of relationships that I'm sure many people have when they have long-term relationships. So pros and cons with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did that impact you? Did that result in like attachment deficit disorder or something like that?
In some ways, my father was not always physically present, and he definitely was not very emotionally present at all. And so a lot of times just struggling to learn how to create my own relationships with other people and being trust issues, relying on other people that they would show up for me when I needed them.
Yeah. How has that impacted you in your life, and how have you been able to overcome that?
So I would say that I have a handful of people that I really let in and don't spend a lot of time with huge groups of people. But the people that I do trust, it takes a while to get on the inside. But once you're on the inside, like I am a loyal supporter of you. And that's kind of been the way I've learned to protect myself in my relationships.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your faith journey to become a disciple of Jesus Christ?
Sure. So raised by a very faithful mother, even though my father was initially active, by the time I was 8, he was not active. He was not the one who baptized me. My friend's father baptized me. We lived in a small area in Tennessee. It was a branch. My family of 9 made up 1/5 of the branch. So it was, lots of small kids. And so at 8 years old, I realized my father was not worthy to baptize me. That wasn't his interest. He wasn't coming to church. And so growing up, I always knew I could stay home with dad or I could go to church with mom. And I think that worked well with my personality because most people don't like to be forced to do anything. And so I, more often than not, chose to go to church with mom. And I just saw her faithful example of being a mom with young kids and showing up to church activities every week. This was when primary and mutual, they were on, other days of the week. And we were living oftentimes 45 minutes to an hour away from the church. And she did it.
Wow. What a commitment. Where were you living at the time?
So that time when I got baptized, it was in Mount Pleasant, Tennessee. And then later we moved closer to Columbia, where the branch was, which we were only at that point 5-minute drive from the branch, which was amazing. And then later we moved into Nashville. So I spent the years between 6 and 12 in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Moving around.
Can you tell us about maybe one of the first times that you remember thinking, wow, this is really true?
You know what? I would say it was when I went on my mission. My father did not want my mom to have scripture study in the home. We went to church, but that was kind of it. She had prayers with us, but my father didn't join in, that kind of thing. And so when I went into the MTC, I was called to Sweden. The overwhelming spirit that I felt in the MTC really testified to me that this gospel was true.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge conversion opportunity for missionaries. Is there any other story from your mission that you'd like to share, maybe someone else who you saw come to Christ?
So it was so interesting going to Sweden. They always talk about that not many converts in the north, but I felt we had been very successful. We had a mission president, President Kimball at the time, who came in after I'd been out for 6 months. And his philosophy was, yes, please, missionaries, spend time with the members, because the members were often the ones who would introduce us to their non-member friends. And we would go out and teach, and had multiple conversions through that method. The thing that struck me very interesting, while I served 9 months in the Stockholm area and then in Jönköping, as we would go out and teach people, what struck me the most is that not everybody said yes to being baptized. And yet God's Spirit was poured out so strongly. I would say even stronger in situations where the people chose not to be baptized. I think it was God's way of saying, I love you. I see you. I want to bless you. Even if you say no. It was just beautiful to see how much God loved them.
It's God saying that I'm not just here when the great things are happening. I'm here to support you and lift you up, even when it's a little bit hard.
Yes. And the person who was listening, the investigator, they admitted it. They could absolutely feel it, the electricity in the room. And yet they chose not to be baptized. And I had a long time, I struggled with that. I'm like, I don't understand why they had such a witness, and yet they still said no.
Yeah. Have you found any answer to that question?
I just think it was God's way of showing them so much love.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Even if you don't choose to do what I am wanting you to do, I still love you.
Yeah.
That's a very powerful message. Okay. You've had a couple people very close to you that have passed away from suicide. Can you tell us maybe about your father's story first and the impact on you?
Sure. So my father, as I mentioned, he struggled with undiagnosed bipolar. And then when he was in his 50s, finally this was diagnosed. And I can see this going back into his mother had depression, once again, undiagnosed, just, not feeling well. And then her mother as well also had. So this line that comes down that we often see in families. I know that several of my siblings have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And so just something to be very aware of. My father often talked in his later years about dying by suicide, which, was very upsetting to me, like, let's not talk about this. And he would attempt to get help on and off, and sometimes the medication works. There were some things that happened that led up to right before he chose to die by suicide. It had to do with, he got a surgery, and so he was off his medication that helped him balance the serotonin and all of the other things, the moods, and he was in physical pain and then this mental anguish, and he finally did it unexpectedly. That was shocking, and I will tell you, at the time, I couldn't even say the word suicide. My best friends did not know how my father actually died, because he'd been kind of in a car accident, and then that precipitated his choice to end his life. So I kind of just left it at, he was in a car accident. I couldn't talk about it. And so later, when my 19-year-old son died by suicide, I wanted to go to that place where I was with my father, where we don't talk about it, we ignore it. But I realized, no, we have to talk about it. This is an epidemic. I tell people the numbers of suicide are so great that if you haven't been impacted by suicide somewhere, you will be. Unfortunately, you will be, just because that is becoming so prevalent in our society. There's so much angst and just confusion, especially among our younger people.
Yeah. I had a business partner years ago who was going through a divorce and in the middle of a lawsuit where his parents and his siblings were suing him over a business issue. And he was in a really bad place and he couldn't see a way out. And there were ways out. And those of us who were his friends were trying to help him see it, but he just would not see it. And I remember one Sunday morning, he called me. I was getting ready for church. And he said, Nathan, my 8-year-old daughter was baptized yesterday. I'm going to church right now to confirm her. And then I'm going to kill myself. And I said, no, you're not. You're not going to leave that church. And I called a couple of friends who were down there in Arizona where he was. And they went and stayed with him. And I was on the first flight down there, stayed with him for 10 days, got him institutionalized. He got himself out of the institution. He was so smart, knew exactly what he had to say to get himself out.
Yeah.
And 10 days later, he killed himself.
Okay.
And it is so sad. Someone that had so much potential, had done so much good, had so many people who loved him, and just couldn't see the solutions that were there.
As I've gone through this journey now, and my son has been gone for just over 6 years, and my father passed away 11 years ago. In the beginning, it's so hard because you think, oh, they're selfish, or why didn't they do this, or why wasn't I enough? And it's not about anybody outside. It's about what they're going through. And I try to help people understand this because I've personally been in the depths of despair where I didn't think I wanted to go on anymore. And I try to explain it like this. It's let's say you have a gash in your arm. It's a physical gash. But if you go to the hospital and they patch you up, eventually you'll feel better and it will be okay. But this depression that exists inside your soul, you don't know if it will ever be okay. You don't know that it will ever stop hurting. And all you want is this pain to just go away. And that's oftentimes the only way you can think that it can stop the pain. It doesn't stop the pain. It only transfers the pain to hundreds of other people.
Yeah. Yeah. The biggest thing that I left with from that experience, 2 of the 12 apostles were there at his funeral. And they talked very candidly about suicide and how it's a medical situation, just like someone who breaks their leg and
yes, I that Joseph Smith talks about. Well, God told Joseph Smith that a lot of the churches, they weren't true because of these false beliefs that have crept in. And I think the same thing about suicide. It was people said, oh, they're going to go to hell because they killed themselves. I think that's wrong. Basically, these people had a mental condition where they overcame the natural tendency to preserve their life, which we all have, right? A tendency to preserve our lives. And it's a mental condition because when you're in that place, you are not thinking right. And
that's right.
I've had so many experiences with my son since his passing, especially that have helped me to understand there is so much we don't understand about the other side. We think we do because we have the gospel and we have, a couple sections in our scriptures that talk to us about the other side. But the things that I have personally learned have expanded my soul and helped me understand that I don't know very much about what happens on the other side.
Yeah. So tell us about whatever you feel comfortable sharing about your son and these experiences you've had with them and what you've learned.
So I'm going to speak to all you parents that might be struggling with your kids, because that was me with my son. All the time. We were fighting all the time. And it had to do with, he was a brilliant kid. super brilliant. He was a freshman at the University of Utah in the mechanical engineering department. And he was so smart. He could argue with me about anything, and he was right and I was wrong, all growing up since he was 6. I mean, he knew. And so we had this kind of adversarial relationship. And I remember when he was 16 and I'm walking down the hall in our home and I'm thinking about the topic that comes up every day is like, how did my son, Christian, what did he do today that upset me? Every day, this is what I'm thinking. I'm so frustrated with him. And this voice said out loud to me, he's not the problem, you are. And I stopped. And I'm like, well, that's not true because I'm the parent. I know best. I know all the things, right? And
Wrong
I just
answer.
want him to do this. And then I had this vision open up to me in my mind's eye of my son and me pre-earth life. And he said to me, Mom, you're going to have a hard time being Christ-like, but I'm going to help you. And I thought about this and I'm like, here's a boy named Christian who just told me the week before that he didn't believe in God, and he's here to help me become more Christ-like. And so for the next 3 years while he was still alive, I switched my view of him and looked at him more as an investigator. You know, instead of being pounding this religion or pounding what I wanted into him, I took a step back and tried to be kinder in my approach to him. And our relationship improved a little bit, but it was not where probably either one of us wanted it to be. After he died, I didn't cry for a week. I was so angry. And I think grief manifests differently. My husband, he cried for 3 days. He was on the floor in a ball, all curled up. He couldn't stop crying. And I was so angry with my son that I couldn't start crying. And then a week after he passed away, I saw a picture of him as a 6-year-old little boy. And that's when the tears came. That's when I started to cry.
Yeah.
3 times from his death for the next week, right before we had his funeral, during that time, I was very sad because I thought, he hates me. He hates me. I was a terrible mom. 3 different times during that next week, I had people approach me and say, I have a message from your son. And all 3 of them said, tell my mother that I love her. And I knew that he was speaking right to me, to my heart, because that's exactly what I had been so upset about. And then fast forward over these years, my son is the closest relationship that I have, even though he's passed. And I don't see that as a barrier to our relationship at all. You mentioned that I had written a book. And at first I was thinking, well, I want it to be, available to everybody. I want them to be open. So I'm not going to talk about God in my book. And then as I started writing my book, I'm like, no, my whole life is about God.
Yeah,
I have to.
It's not possible.
It's not possible. And so I wrote the book, and it's basically a testimony, my testimony about how God blesses us through the difficult times. And when I finished writing the book and I got it published, that day was actually the saddest day of my life because I felt my son leave me. And I felt that I had lost him twice, once physically and once spiritually. And the spiritual loss hurt more than the physical loss. And I was just talking to my son and I said, where are you? Like, what are you doing? I don't feel you with me. And he said, Mom, I've got to go help other people. I'm helping people who are struggling with their own suicide, and I'm trying to help them stay in their bodies. I was with you as much as I could be when you needed me, but now I need to go somewhere else. And so he still shows up when I talk about him. I'm sure he's here with me right now. I love talking about him. But the whole process of writing that book, and so now it's available on Amazon. I offer it to various organizations, nonprofit organizations. They just buy it at cost, and they give it to the parents who have lost children by suicide. And there is one woman who runs this organization. She lives out in Minnesota. And she said, your book is the number one resource that our parents say has helped them through this loss and grief. And I have to say that if my experience can bless someone else's life to navigate this extreme grief, then something good will have come of what I experienced.
Yeah. What's the best advice that you give in the book, or that you could give to parents who are going through this type of grief and loss?
So first of all, everybody is on their own path. Their path is not your path, right? So my other kids are adults. They're not active. And I pray for them all the time. And I just said, God, bless them on their path. Like, you know their path more than I know their path. So I'm going to love and support them. And I would say the number one lesson, which is so shocking because Jesus says this, what's the number one thing, is just to love one another. Love really is the answer to whatever question there is. So if you're grieving, or if you're in a difficult relationship, especially with your children, the answer is always love.
Yeah, I love that. Talk to me about how joy plays a part in this journey of grief you've been through.
So now it's been just over 6 years. My son died in March of 2019. And in the beginning, I never thought I would laugh again. I never thought I would find joy or have anything that I was doing that would, make me happy. The year after my son died, it was the year before COVID. We joked that was our COVID year because we shut down. Like, we didn't want to do anything, go anywhere, do anything at all. And once in a while, we'd go to these comedies, these plays that would be comedies, and we couldn't laugh because it wasn't funny, because our grief had been so deep that nothing like penetrated and brought joy to us. And now, 6+ years later, I can laugh again. I can find things that bring me joy. And I can say how grateful I am for the experiences. Looking back, would I have wanted to go through this experience of losing my son to suicide? No. But what has it brought me? It has brought me closer to my son, closer to God, closer to my Savior, closer to understanding what the plan of salvation and happiness is all about, and that this life is so temporary. Things, possessions, all of that are so temporary. They mean nothing. It's our relationships and the witness and the closeness that I have gained during these 6 years. It would not have been possible without this experience. And I look back at that vision I had with my son, where he said, Mom, I'm going to help you become more Christ-like. And he absolutely has. And I look at it and say, was that his mission for me? And was his life's path to help me become more Christ-like? And how grateful I am that he loved me enough to help me with my struggles.
Yeah. So you talked about how this journey you've been through, this journey of grief, has helped you come closer to Jesus Christ. How has this journey specifically impacted your testimony in him?
Without him and his atonement, then I wouldn't be able to be reunited with my son. And I absolutely believe the reality of one day being able to physically embrace my son and be with him, and to have joy in our continual progression. And I mentioned that not all of us, we often think because, we're in the gospel, we know all the things that are going to happen after this life. Well, there was a time a few years ago when I was feeling a little bit depressed, thinking about my son. And I said, to myself, just talking to myself, wow, son, I'm kind of feeling sad that you made this choice, because now, while I don't believe that you're damned to hell, right? You still kind of are damned in your eternal progression. And his voice came into my head so strong. And I know it's him. I mean, this is the way he is. He was upset with me. He said, Mom, my choice did not affect my eternal progression. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because here I wanted to put him in a box based on his choices. And I thought, who am I to tell God to say to the Savior what is and is not possible with the atonement? And so now I'm just like, well, I'm so excited to see where everything goes.
Reminds me of a quote from Spencer W. Kimball, where he said, even if you've walked a mile in someone else's shoes, you still can't judge them.
Yeah, you can't. You can't.
And at that funeral of my my friend, my business partner, that was essentially the message that one of the 12 apostles left: is we cannot judge. That's left for God to deal with. It's our job to love.
Exactly. That's all that comes down to, and we have different paths. And, they talk about how there are over 100 people that are impacted when someone dies by suicide. Those ripple effects go out. And it has been a struggle for me personally, for our family. Everything about it's affected our lives, but also my son's friends would reach out to me over the years, and the ripple effects that his life had on other people. And so I would just encourage people to understand that if you are ever depressed in that way, please seek out someone and talk to them, because every life matters. I've had 3 different mentors in my life, and every one of them struggled with kind of suicidal ideation earlier in their lives. And I thought, wow, if they had died by suicide, then decades later, when I needed them to help me through a crisis, they would not have been there.
That's right. You never know what kind of difference you're going to make in the world. That situation that I went through, although it was not my child and not a direct family member, my biggest takeaway, kind of an analogy, I see things visually. And we used to live in Spanish Fork, and there was a beautiful, huge bridge that went from our neighborhood over the river and into this sports park where there are all these sports fields. And that bridge could probably have 50 people or more, 100 people could go on that bridge, and it would be strong and it wouldn't collapse. But if you took a tank and you drove a tank over that bridge, it would collapse. And our mental health, our mental well-being is kind of like that bridge. And we all have a weight limit on that bridge. And my biggest takeaway that's helped me is there's times in my life where the weight on my bridge gets to be too heavy, and I need to ask for help, and I need to get things off of my bridge. When I am at that point where my bridge is becoming dangerously overloaded and I'm at risk of a collapsing bridge, I got to get things off the bridge. And I've got to go to people who love me, who care about me. And what I need to ask them to do is, can you help me get this off my bridge?
Exactly.
This is here and this is here, and help them understand what weight they can take off.
That seems to be what helps. COVID as a blessing for what the lessons that were taught. And my hope for families as they went through this COVID and they realized, what is the most important thing in my life? What am I striving for? Why am I spending certain effort and energy and money on things? Do they really matter? Families running around, taking their kids to 100 activities and being so caught up in the busyness, and just finally having a space where they can slow down and connect together. I would hope that there would be some lessons there that families learned what is most important.
Yeah, I loved that time and that connection time that it allowed. I know some people hated it, but man, that was a blessing. Okay. Lark, thanks for being with us today. Thanks for your stories and your faith. In conclusion, I guess 2 last questions for you. Number 1, if people have enjoyed what you said and it's touched them and they want to learn more about you and your work, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Well, let me preface this by saying I was very involved in the suicide prevention community, and it got very heavy for me to the point where I needed to step away from being as actively involved. I'm happy to talk about it if somebody comes to me, but I don't go out and solicit speaking about it. But my book is available on Amazon, as I mentioned, under my name, Learning to Breathe Again, Choosing to Heal After Losing a Loved One to Suicide. I also have a website, larkgalley.com. I am now coaching and I love it. So I've like I said, I've found some really great joy. My patriarchal blessing says that when the time comes that I want you to teach your perfected virtues and help other people. And as a younger person, I was like, well, that's saying a lot. Like, who has perfected virtues and knowledge, right? Like that's that I just never would have considered it perfected. And now, in my older years, I am helping other people with lessons learned and my perfected virtues of just saying, like, you got to get rid of a lot of the junk that's holding you back and just embrace the love and the joy and be more intentional in how we show up in life. So that's what I would say about that.
Sounds great. And finally, in conclusion, Lark, why do you believe?
Why do I believe? Because I would say that my testimony of the plan of salvation was rooted in me as I came here as a child. I have always believed in the plan of salvation and always believed that God had a plan for me. Throughout my life, I have had multiple struggles. As I mentioned about being with a bipolar father and moving around. 30 years ago, my first husband left me 6 months pregnant. Disappeared. Okay. I don't even know where he is now. Like, you know what I'm talking about? It's like really weird. We were married in the temple. Yeah. We were married in the temple and going to the temple every week or every month. And we would, very active. And then just things happened in his life where he had something happen. His father died. And then he just it was too much for him and he disappeared. And yet God was with me during that whole time and helped me. And a year and a half later, I had my child, a beautiful baby, which was a blessing. And I got very close to God during that time. Beautiful baby. And then when she was 14 months old, married to my current husband, we've been married. It's coming up on 28 years now.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. And life was good. When he left, my first husband left, I never, thought that I would trust someone again or be happy or that, my whole plan was shattered, right? And that's not the case. We think our life looks like this and it doesn't look like that at all. And so since that time, I've known that God has always had my back. Even when we went through this with my son's suicide, I always knew that God was there and supporting me.
And even if we don't understand his plan for us, that doesn't mean that he doesn't have our best interests at heart.
Exactly. And I will say, marriage, especially second marriage, is not easy. It's, there's a lot of things that come up with staying committed to each other. The divorce statistics go up when a couple has lost a child. And that has been, a real struggle. We had to allow each other to grieve in the way that we needed to grieve. I needed to be very vocal and my husband was not. And we had to allow each other our space. And when you have two individuals that feel so shattered because of this event, it's hard to heal your individual self and then come together as a couple. So here we are, 6 years later, still humans, but we're making it through. And I think that's the beauty of staying committed to your covenants and your commitments to each other, is that you need each other more than anything. I realize that when we isolate ourselves, that's when the adversary can come in and we can feel the depression. We need each other.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us today, Lark. Thanks for sharing your story and your faith and your testimony.
Thanks, Nathan.